Hello, everybody. Okay. Hi, Nisreen. Hi, Becca. Karen. Good.
Good morning.
Hi, Leroy. How are you doing? All right. We are on a tight schedule today. I'm sorry, I was a few minutes late than usual. Okay. Right. Okay. The first thing is there is one little, oops, what's going on here? One little tiny change for the syllabus. It has nothing to do with the dates or actual assignments. It's just that I've changed the experiment for lab report 2. So I'm going to show you the updated syllabus, and I posted it on Blackboard so you can download it. Oops, it's not this one, it's this one. And replace, basically you need to replace one page with the new updated syllabus that has to do with just a different experiment too. So let me share the screen with you. There it is. Okay. So make it a little larger. We are at week 6, October 1st. And this is when your Stroop report was due. I haven't checked since yesterday, but I do have Karen and Raphael's report and Nick and Isaac's. So I'll ask you in a second, those who are present. So we will start chapter 5 today. Yes, it's memory. It's fun. I hope that you guys will like that. Because memory is actually a lot of interesting stuff, and we will be doing it for 3 weeks in October. So this we start today, which is a continuation of week 5, and then we'll go on through weeks 6 and 7 and 8, basically almost until the end of October. And then we will finish what's left for us in terms of the other 5 chapters. So what you're going to be doing is experiment 2, but not false memory, but something called the animacy effect. And that's what you can see now here reflected in the syllabus. Otherwise, it's exactly the same. Your data collection is the same time. Your lab report submission is the same time. So nothing really changed except for the actual experiment, because the one that I had originally might be a bit too complex for you, and this one should be okay. All right. So syllabus is posted. Download it again. Replace the old one with the new one. Like I said, there is one more little change here that is exactly the same due date, October 29th, but it's a different different experiment. Okay, let's kill that and then move on to our PowerPoint. Oh, before we do that, let me see. Do we have Denise or Julia with us? Julia, yes. Julia, have you submitted your lab report number 1?
Yeah, we both did last night.
Oh, okay, good.
Ish. Yeah.
You posted on the Blackboard, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, fantastic, good. Nisreen and Amanda, I know Nisreen is here.
Yeah,
Have you guys? Okay, good, perfect. Jeffrey and Becca. Rebecca? Submitted. Okay, good. Justin and Simon. Justin? Okay, good. Okay. Melissa and Noor. Is anybody here? Maybe not. Leroy, how about you and Ari?
Yes, we submitted it.
Fantastic. Good job. And Amber and Parker. Parker, do you still have issues with your mic? Okay, good. All right, everybody's in good shape except for a couple of people who had some emergencies. Goody. Any other questions or reactions or anything before we move on to the material for today? Now would be a good time for you guys to ask me. Okay. Yes, Nick, I have, because these are the ones that I have on my list. I can see that you have, right? You and Karen and Raphael were the first people to do so. That's why I didn't call on you, because I already have it. Okay. As usual, we will try to have a little break, in an hour. I will be present if you want to ask me something regarding the class or what will happen next in life. We'll do that. Goody. So today we are very excited, at least I am very excited, because we will move on to memory. But let's first finish the class business. Like I said, we have a different experiment too, which is going to be the animacy effect instead of false memory. Let's go back for a second. It's not a particularly difficult experiment. So what I did to encourage you to read the introduction article carefully, I have posted it as your potential activity. So I strongly encourage all of you to take advantage of this, because you also will get points. Now, I have changed the points assignment to reflect the fact that to get full 2 points, you have to answer the questions correctly. The number of questions varies between 4 and 8, depending on the. So if you don't answer them all correctly, then I will only give you 1 point out of 2. If everything is completely incorrect, I'm sorry. The problem that I see from people who responded to Strayer and Johnston's article on attention is the same problem I saw before. That is, many of you still don't understand what variables are. The difference between the variable name and variable levels, what independent variables are, and what dependent variables are in terms of how they measured. Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a question. So the participation points for this week and next week, are they going to be like combined, or we have to do like the points for this week and next week?
I think the way it is set up now is for the continuation of attention to go into Monday. But okay. I think I will also post a few things for memory, maybe not as many, because most of the memory stuff will be then from Tuesday, October 6th until Monday, October 12th.
Okay.
So think of this week 5 as being sort of combined with week 4 in terms of activities. No, with week 4. So it's going to be, it will be open until October 12th.
Okay.
And
all right.
on October 13th, we will get into activities for week 6, which will be long-term memory.
Okay.
But again, if you if you get a comment from me, something like, oops, you did not answer questions 2 and 6 correctly, it's almost always because you did not do the variables correctly. And to deal with that, I have a suggestion, and I already discussed it with one of you. If somebody wants to catch up on this, this is the 201 material, really. Not everybody had 201. That's the issue here. So I can send you a chapter that you can read, or you can just take any research methods textbook. It doesn't have to be the one that is being used by our department, but anything. And read the chapters that have to do with measurement, variables, hypotheses, and simple experiments. It's about 3 chapters. And that will help you. You need to do exercises to understand the difference. So when I read your Lab 1 report, which I hope to have graded by next Thursday, I'll see whether you have any issues, additional issues. If that's the case, you guys are almost in charge of this course. I mean, I have my agenda, but you should have yours. So if a few of you, or even a couple of people, say, look, we really would like you to help us with variables and understanding independent versus dependent variable, we can have an exercise like that during our Thursday classes. But I need to hear from you. So if nobody says anything, I'll just grade and then you're on your own to learn what you don't know. Otherwise, you can say, yes, we would like to do something. And then I will schedule an activity like this for one of the Thursdays, hopefully soon enough, so you can get that under your belt before you write your lab report too. So, but I need some response from you guys. It was interesting because I was talking to Cheryl, who is the associate director of Verrazano honors program. It turns out that I, for whatever reason, thought that most of you are Verrazano students. Apparently not. There is a bunch of people here in this class who are equivalent to Verrazano, but not technically part of Verrazano College. And I keep calling you Verrazano students, but so there. Right. Okay. So again, I encourage you to read the paper by Nairn and colleagues 2013 for these extra points, for points for participation. And that will help you tremendously with your lab report too. Okay, next Monday, your quiz 4 on actually chapter that we're starting today. So you're gonna have a little bit of a leg up for that quiz. I've seen that 3 people have already taken it. It's due as usual on Monday by 10 p.m. And the second class, that is going to be Tuesday, October 6th, I think I will continue to make it optional. We will probably have to spill out some of the material, especially working memory, into Tuesday. So again, I encourage you to attend. Your additional point that you can get from attending a lecture once you write a little blurb about it with some maybe extensions, some questions. Again, I encourage everybody to have a look at Leroy's blog, because Leroy is actually doing an excellent job in thinking about what could be sort of added, or what you could think about when you take the lecture and the textbook and sort of run with it. And Leroy's stuff is excellent. Thank you, Leroy. I enjoy reading your stuff. So now October 6th is going to be optional, but again, we will do some exercises, I hope. So attend that to get your knowledge of short-term memory and working memory in place. Obviously then October 8th, which is, let me look again at the syllabus, it says APA style, which means hopefully that I will have, if not all, but most of your lab report 1s graded, and we will talk about issues with lab 1 report. Therefore, it will help you with your lab report 2. So it's mandatory. You have to attend that class. So that's October 8th. Next. Finally, you can already start collecting data for experiment 2. It is due by October 15th, which is a Tuesday. But, you know, if you can do it by Monday, 14th is even better. The collection will probably take, I would say, about 20 minutes. Now, and I'm going to be strict. And this time there were 2 people who did not contribute data for various reasons. So if you don't contribute your data, you will be taken out of the group you're in now and paired with somebody else who didn't. Or if you're the only one, you're going to be the only one to write the lab on your own, because we need everybody to be a good citizen. It shouldn't be any issues now because you already have your Finding 5 accounts. Remember, it's completely free. And I have programmed it this time in such a way that if by any chance something happens, your computer crashes or whatever, you can come back and do it again. And my original setup was only once, but now you can do it again if something doesn't work. Right? And I think, okay, any questions that you might have regarding the next month of our life? Okay, everybody seems to be good. Okay, you know, you can always email me. I usually email right back, unless I'm not at my computer, which is rare. Okay, let's move on. This is our little outline. Like I said, I hope we can get through the first 5 points. I doubt we're going to get to working memory. That's why I think that's going to be the first thing to do on Tuesday, October 6th. And of course, I will ask you, those of you who are here, and there's enough people, 15, to participate a little bit, a few little things, so you're not completely bored. So again, I remind you that if you are in class, you should stay in class. Don't just leave your icon and walk away, because then you're not participating, and that's useless. Then why are you wasting your time? Do something else. All right. So this is our big question, the black box. What is memory? Now, it's not really a question to you guys. It's a rhetorical question. Because remember when I started talking to you about cognitive psychology, especially in the beginning, the main point is that cognitive psychology is actually not something that we can easily or directly observe. Like social behavior, you can see what, you know, people are introverts, extroverts, they socialize, they don't, and stuff like that. With cognitive psychology, we have to do a lot of inferences. And if you, again, recall our week 1, when we talked about history of cognitive psychology, we talked about the behaviorism approach, where you have a stimulus that gets into somehow your mind, and then you have some response. But what's critical for behavioral psychologists was not to be engaged in trying to understand what goes on in the mind, because for them it really wasn't that important, because you can't observe it. I mean, yes, you can maybe do surgery, but still it's not going to help you. So with this in mind, cognitive psychology relies on what we can infer from behavior. And the same applies to memory. And memory is an extremely complex phenomenon, maybe the next most complex one after language. Language is even more complex. So let's start with a first demonstration, for which, of course, I will need your notebooks or your Google Docs, whatever you're using. Or even in this case, we could easily do chat if that's what you would like to do. All right. So the really interesting way, and I think that's why so many students like memory, is because it's kind of easy to observe it. Well, not maybe observe it, but think about it, reflect on it in your own life, on the life of your relatives and family members and friends. Okay, so the easy way is to perform a memory task. And I encourage you guys to, if you have time, ask one of your parents to do that. That's going to be a very interesting comparison to a younger group like you with an older group like me. Okay, so what's the task? So I'm asking you to get your notebooks ready. And I would ask you to write anything that comes to mind in regards to this demo, even the stuff that may turn out to be wrong in a few minutes. Okay, let me just make sure that I have the sound on. And there it is. Yes, good. So get ready. Your task is
Hi-ho! 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 It's home from work we go. Hi-ho! 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 It's home from work we go. Hi-ho! Hi-ho!
okay. So let's do chat. I guess it will be a little faster. So type in the names of the 7 dwarfs in the chat. Okay, remember there are 7. Okay. Okay, Justin says 2, 3. All right. Jeffrey, 3. Okay. Can anybody do 7? Oh, good, Justin, 4. All right. 5, Becca, good. Uh-huh. Leroy, 1, 2, 3, 4. I got all 7. Isaac, type them all in. Oh, I did already. Okay, I missed that. Well, got 6 out of 7. Uh-huh. Okay, does anybody have a name that you didn't get any? Karen, and there is a reason why you didn't, right? I assume. Nisrian, the same. I don't even know one. Bishoy. So Karen, Bishoy, and Nisrian seem to not to know any of them. Can one of you guys unmute yourself and tell us why you think you don't know any of them?
Hey, Professor, I actually never watched it as a kid. See,
Right,
I
Bishoy,
know.
because
Yeah.
where did you grow up?
Okay, I grew up in Egypt.
See, what time?
Actually,
Well,
wait. I was born in Egypt and I grew up in Dubai.
uh-huh.
I was born in
When?
Egypt, yeah.
How old were you when you came to this country?
I was 14.
See, okay. So if you're not from this culture, right, you would never. I mean, you won't have this memory. I had exactly
Yeah.
the same problem until I came here. I never watched it. I watched it with my kids who were growing up here in the U.S. Perfect. Did anybody get? I'm going to show you the list next. See if you got something that is not on the list. You thought it was. So I'm not showing you the actual 7 names yet. So here, the 7 correct names are embedded in this list. This is called recognition. Now, recognition obviously is much easier than recall, because the actual answers are available in the list. You just have to identify them. So if you have some kind of a knowledge of these names, as opposed to four of us who never had that, you maybe say, yeah, of course, I thought of that, but I couldn't remember. Does anybody have this revelation that they could see a name that they did not recognize immediately or did not come up with immediately? Bashful, yes, for Jeffrey. Okay, good, good. All right, anybody else? Okay, so now I'm going to show you the actual names, right? So we have sleepy, dopey, sneezy, grumpy, bashful, happy, dog. And Isaac said he got all of them. All right, so here, right, how difficult was the task? Well, it's not difficult if you got them all. Good, good. You must have been watching a lot of cartoons, Justin. So it's not difficult if you, if you have been exposed to this in this case in your childhood, but for people who came from different cultures, came late to this country, like me, I was 29. I mean, you would not know until, and the task will be impossible, not just difficult. So cultural factors obviously matter. What I was thinking, maybe one of you or some of you would get this tip of the tongue phenomenon when you say, I know it starts with the D or with the B. And that, I think it's a long name, but I don't quite remember what it is. But thinking of that, it is a B, starts with a B, and it's a long name, that's tip of the tongue phenomenon. If somebody keeps pushing you, it may pop up, right? And it also sometimes helps us to realize that many of our memories actually are organized by not only meaning, but sounds, or in this case, if it's written by letters. Newscreen says, I was actually born and raised here, but I still didn't know. Oh, interesting, Leroy. Was it, can I ask you a question, whether it happens to you now, or one, you know, the kind of life you have to live now with your challenges, or did it happen to you even before your traumatic brain injury?
It happens to me more now.
I see. Okay. So when we get to language, we may want to talk a little bit about the personal experiences, if you're willing to share it with us. Okay. So this is what we will come back to, is something that we call memory tasks, which we have three, although one could be actually split in two. So one is free recall. When somebody just asks you a question, you have to provide the answers. That's the hardest one. Versus cued recall, when somebody says, okay, so my original question was name the 7 dwarfs. Cued recall would be, okay, there is a dwarf whose name starts with a B, and it's a long name. Well, that's a cue. It may help you. Versus the easiest one, which is recognition. When recognition actually has all the correct answers embedded in a number of other potential answers. There, as long as you can sort of think about your original memories, you may be able to come up with all the answers. In fact, your multiple choice questions in your classes are recognition tests. And the problem with them often is it looks like you recognize it, and so you happily click, but often these multiple choice questions are designed in such a way as to lead you down the garden path that is, gets you confused, thinking that you know, because recognition questions are very hard to design, not to give away the answer right away. Good. Let's try the next one. Let me check the sound is on. Parker, I don't know why you're not getting the video. Let me ask everybody else. Is there anybody else who did not see the actual dwarfs on the screen, or did everybody see them?
I saw them.
Okay, good. I saw them. Okay, good. So Parka, that's something about you, so you're set up. All right, let's do our second demonstration.
Oh, darling, I didn't know you were here. What have you got there?
I brought you some plates.
Oh, I had fail kisses. Aren't ladies better than men?
I think so, yeah. I'd go along with that.
Oh, good.
Would you like a Danish pastry?
It's a lovely idea.
Oh, would you like one?
I would, actually.
Oh, good. We've got enough too, that's marvellous.
Yes, one each.
Good.
Here, one, Mike.
Oh, thank you very much. Sorry, they're rather large, aren't they?
And ladies second.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take the small one.
Oh, this is enormous, very difficult to hold, actually, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, have a serviette.
Oh, that's over there.
Make it
Oh,
easier.
that sounds like a male name. Serviette who?
Serviette.
Yes, sir. Starts
Oh,
with
sir.
Serviette, yes.
One of the things that characterises Clive's day is that he continually makes entries in his diary. Now I say makes entries in his diary rather than keeps a diary, because in fact he's not keeping the diary. It is an inner compulsion to record the momentous event of waking up, because Clive's perception of his own condition is that because he has no memory whatsoever up to the current 10, 20 seconds, or maybe half a minute, depending on whether there's 20 seconds, or maybe half a minute.
Sorry, I had to mute.
Been distracted, any proactive interference. On the whole, his conscious working span memory is that current minute, so everything else behind the minute is blank. So everything until now is unknown and is void. So he uses the analogy of feeling as if he has just woken up. He says it's like just waking up for the first time. It's like just becoming conscious. It's as if I have been unconscious for however many years. And because this is a continual state, unless he's actually engaged on a conversation or on playing Patience of Solitaire, which he does a lot, or on playing the piano, or on taking a walk, unless his mind is elsewhere engaged, that is his experience of life, which is, oh, it's as if I've just woken up. Oh, you're the first person I've seen. Oh, and it's this amazement that from, I mean, can you imagine what would it be like if you were unconscious and you just came to, but you didn't have a lot of people around your bed saying, oh, you've been unconscious, you're in hospital. You've just got people eating a meal or watching TV as if nothing has happened. So he is habituated to that condition. He realizes that it's not surprising, but he uses that as an analogy for the experience of having no memory. It's as if I've just woken up. And because for him it is momentous, he has to write it down, and he has to write it down on any available surface. If the diary is in front of him, he will write it down there. He will record the time, 10:50 a.m., awake first time, and then he looks at the previous entry, which was 10:48 a.m., awake first time, and he says, no, I wasn't awake then, that wasn't me, that wasn't proper awakeness. This is the first real awakeness. So he goes through the diary, scoring out previous entries and underlining the current new entry, because this now is the real awakeness. All the previous awakenesses are unknown to me.
I've nothing to say about it. It's just like death. No thoughts of any kind, no dreams, no difference between day and night, no sight, no sound, no taste, no touch, no smell, exactly like death. No difference between day and night. No thoughts, nothing. No dreams, nothing at all. Any question you have is to answer, I don't know. There's nothing to say.
Oops.
No dreams, no sight, no sound, no taste, no touch, no smell, nothing at all, no thoughts, nothing.
Since how long ago?
2 years, that's all I know. The whole time I've been ill, nothing at all, no thoughts, nothing.
What's it like now?
I can see. First time. First time I had any evidence I was alive.
And do you feel sort of normal now?
Yes. Since I sat down here, I don't remember sitting down here.
You don't remember sitting down?
No, I never see any human being now. I can see you fully of him now. Taste, no touch, no smell, nothing at all.
Do you know what happened to you?
No,
Any idea?
no idea at all. Just like death.
Do you know how long you've been on
No
this?
idea. Just seems like years. That's all.
Any idea what year you got ill?
No.
Have a guess.
Sometime in the 80s.
Sometime in the 80s, yes.
That's all I can say.
Early 80s, mid 80s, late
No idea.
80s?
I can't remember.
Guess?
Middle 80s.
Middle 80s, yeah. That's correct.
Hmm.
And do you know what year it is now?
No.
Have a guess.
Well, it's in the 90s, I suppose.
Yeah, how far in would you
No
say?
idea. I couldn't, anything between 91 and 99, I don't know.
You've no feeling for that? No. But it's now 1998.
Good.
Any idea what month it is? All right, have a look out the window.
No, it looks like about March, April, no, February, March, something like February.
It is April. You're right
Yeah.
first time, yeah.
Mm.
So whose birthday is it next month?
Mine.
Yep.
And my brother.
Any idea how old you'll be?
93,000.
No.
No?
How old do you think really?
21.
No. How old do you really think? How old do you feel?
22.
You feel 22, and how old do you think you are?
67.
No.
No?
You really think? Do you really think you're 67?
No idea what it is. No clue. It could be 90 or 100, all I know about it.
Mm.
No difference in day and night, no dreams, nothing at all.
Do you think your hair's grey or
No idea.
white?
I've never seen it.
All right, so this is the famous case of Clive Waring. And we'll talk more about him when we get to amnesia in a couple of weeks. Very interesting case. I'm just typing his name. Clive was a composer and a specialist in medieval music, and he had herpes encephalitis. And I think it was like 1989. Very high fever. He got unconscious, and it took a few days before he was actually hospitalized. And when they finally did that and they stabilized him, turns out that there was a damage to his hippocampus. And what happens
Professor,
with
I have a question.
damage in the hippocampus? Go ahead.
All right, so he remembers absolutely nothing since he was born?
Yes, he remembers absolutely nothing. What happens is he has photos around him, and what you see is an old clip from after 10 years after his illness. He's still alive, and this is almost 30 years later.
But
And
Professor,
he
how he remembers to talk, how he remembers the word, like some specific words, how he remembers them.
It's a good question, Bishoy, because most of our language skills is actually procedural memory. And the procedural memory versus declarative memory is almost always spared in amnesics. So he can talk, and you notice that he actually has a sense of humor, right? He can joke. So all of that, and his intelligence is completely intact. It's just that there is no way to form new memories. So he lives in the present, and that's extremely painful. If anybody is interested, you should read Deborah's book. Deborah is the woman in the clip, and she wrote a book. It's not terribly sort of scientific. It's more about her emotions and living through these years with him. They got divorced at some point because she just couldn't handle it anymore, and then they got married again. There is a large BBC story around that time, 1999, and then the book. And that's interesting if you want to see what goes on with him today. And Bishoy, also in response to your question, is he remembers how to play music. He remembers how to conduct a choir. Now, one would say, how? How can he do that? But again, because this is procedural and not declarative memory. We'll keep talking about it. Go ahead, Bishoy.
Yeah, I just want to know the name of the book, Professor, if you know the name.
Oh, somebody who is around who can Google. If I Google, then I have to switch from my
Okay, I'll just
presentation.
Google it myself, no problem.
Yes, good. Nick, yes, he's still alive. He is, and his life continues to be like this, as if there is no life. So it's a very weird, painful, tragic situation. Good. So these were just a couple of things for you to think about as our introduction to the entire month of memory, basically a whole month. All right, so we'll do a particular class on October 22nd, which will be on amnesia. We'll talk about Henry Molaison, another extremely interesting case, obviously celebrity case. Henry died in 2009, so he was known for many, many years as patient HM. Now, when he's gone, we use his full name. Clive obviously is in this list as well. He was originally a celebrity case because Deborah, who is his legal guardian, wanted to share his story with the world. And in general, many other patients that we know of, and the custom is to abbreviate their names using just the initials. So there's a KC case, there is KF case, and a bunch of others. So stay tuned for October 22nd. For now, I will put the amnesia and neuropsychological evidence aside. I will just come back to that briefly as we continue. Okay, I want to kind of continue. Well, I want you to think of cognitive psychology as a continuity, right? We started with perception and sensation and perception. We moved on to attention. Now we are in memory. And the reason why I want to sort of underscore this continuity, because memory is critical for both perception, sensation, and attention. Because think about it, when you perceive something, right, you have to combine the information. Think back to the constructivist theory of perception. You have to you have to combine the information from the stimulus. Remember, proximal stimulus, the energy on our sensory organs, with the things that we can retrieve from our memory. That is our top-down knowledge. We know that gorillas are not safe. So when we see something that we think is a gorilla, we run. So, and we only know that because we already know that gorillas could be dangerous to humans. So in that sense, perception is intimately tied up to memory. And of course, perception in itself also changes memory. That is, if you see something new, you have to explore it and come up with a concept, and then it becomes a part of your memory store. The sort of underlying mental representation of memories is called a memory trace. And Carl Lashley introduced another term called engram. It means the same. Again, remember, cognitive psychology is all about inferences, is all about indirect evidence. So we create in parallel to the actual objects. So we have a gorilla, we have a mental image of that gorilla, a percept. And now we will have mental or memory traces in our mind, in our memory from our previous exposure to that percept. We've been to the zoo, we saw a gorilla. We watched King Kong, we have another gorilla. We took a biology class, we have a third gorilla, whatever it is, it all will be into these memory traces. And obviously the good thing is once the perceptual experience is terminated, the memory trace stays. And think about it. Now we are in the fall, but it's very easy for us to think, look out your window and imagine the scene. If you have a window, imagine the scene of the same stuff that you're looking at now in the winter, in the snow. Well, you're not perceiving that because there is no winter now, but you can conjure up the image because you have memories of what it means for the scenery to be under the snow, for example. Okay, we start again and we'll come back to that with just a tiny little reminder to ourselves how it all began. Here is a very important person in the history of cognitive psychology, George Miller, also unfortunately died but lived a very long life. His probably most famous work is this magical number 7 plus minus 2. I'm sure that even if you don't remember what it is, you probably remember this number, okay? So it means that according to George Miller's work, we can only hold on to about 7 items in our short-term memory at a time. And the way he came up with this idea, and this is an interesting point, I probably should have created an activity for you, but I didn't, is that at the time in the 1950s, he was working at the Bell Labs. And Bell Labs was and still is a leading research laboratory in this country. And the idea was that the telephone numbers are quickly exploding, and they used to be letters and then just 4 numbers. Now, if you take 4 numbers even out of 10, the combinations are still limited. So if you have to think ahead of the future, you need a way to expand this into something that could be available to us for a while. So why not 4? Why 7? Because of Miller's work. He showed that people can manage 7 digits, but anything above that becomes an issue. So that's how the phone numbers in 1950s were expanded from 4 digits to 7. Of course, we have a zip code, but that's slightly separate from this. So because if you only can manage 7 digits or 7 pieces of information, if something new is coming in, something old has to make room for it. So we will lose something previous. And that's how he came up with the idea of limited capacity for memory. And that's how a lot of research, as we will talk a little bit about it, from the 1960s and 1970s, was about organization of memory. What can we do, not just from the basic type of research, but also from the applied point of view, to make sure that people's memory capacity is not overburdened with information. Okay, so like I said, from Miller's idea, we now can look at the extensions in terms of our favorite information processing approach. Remember, information processing approach has to do with boxes and arrows, and the 3 stages: acquisition, storage, retrieval. Every single model in cognitive psychology, at least in the past, was based on this. And the most influential one in terms of memory, from something that we already call modern psychology, is Atkinson and Shiffrin's 1968. So for them, it was, the main point was to distinguish 3 different types of memory, or 3 different stores, or 3 different buffers. And they either hold information temporarily or they hold information permanently. Now, sometimes you will see that as something that's referred to as a multi-store model of memory. Okay? But there are several versions of that. We will focus on this classical one with 3 main components: sensory, short-term, and long-term memory. Now, terminology, and I'm going to show you to you next, is actually more than just that. But many of these things are synonyms to each other. So you should not be confused when you see register versus buffer. Think of that as just another way of thinking of it, because there were other people who used that multi-store approach to memory. And that's what it looks like. So we have here sensory registers. Okay. The incoming, so what's on the left is the outside world. The incoming information comes in. It's initially held here. Obviously, we have as many sensory stores as we have sensory organs or senses. And we talked about 5 from Aristotle and 9 from Sherrington. So pick your choice. For the purposes of our historic overview, we will only talk about sort of visual and auditory. So vision and sound, but you can think of that for haptic, sensory, buffer, and so on. Okay, but then by the means of attention, whatever is being held here temporarily is transferred, here's our arrow, to the short-term memory, okay? Information in the short-term memory is rehearsed. Here is the loop, okay? And it's maintained via rehearsal. That is, you keep saying the stuff to yourself either out loud or in your head, but you're rehearsing. If it is rehearsed long enough, that's the idea, it will get copied through encoding into long-term memory. And encoding is something that's extremely important, and we will spend most of the time talking about encoding during our week 7. And then, of course, we can, once we need this information, we can take it from long-term memory and retrieve it back into our short-term memory and use it for whatever actions that we need to perform, like we need to recognize our gorilla, for example. So we have a memory trace of gorilla somewhere here, a bunch of them may be fused. That's a separate story. When we talk about concepts, we'll look into that. And then we can retrieve knowledge of gorillas and decide what we need to do. This model has become so popular that actually became known as the modal model of memory. I always have issues with how to pronounce these 2 words correctly without pronouncing them identically. Okay, here is another representation, the same idea as you can see, just that sensory registers are expanded here to include other sensory organs. There is some kind of interaction with the world, that is, we act upon our memories, and there is something that Atkinson and Sherfin spent a lot of time on, is control processes. Hopefully you guys thought a little bit about it when you were writing your lab report 1, which was also about controlled versus automatic processing in attention. But again, attention and memory are closely related. And here's the reference. It's a huge, difficult article, but well worth it for those who might be interested in studying memory. Okay, terminology, like I said, let me just to make sure that you understand that there is nothing wrong when you see several different terms. They still mean the same. So we have our 3-component, 3-store distinction: sensory, short-term, long-term, and then sensory could be called registers, sorry, memory, store, or even buffer. If we look at the our actual classic William James, of whom I talked to you about many, many times in his first book, Principles of Psychology, he actually distinguishes between primary and secondary memory, so short-term versus long-term, but primary versus secondary is James's terms, and they actually are used until today. And then we also have another very important contribution from Alan Baddeley from University of York in the UK, who extended and modified the short-term memory to include and separate it from working memory, which again, looking at time, is not going to happen today. Okay. This is something that you need to either take a picture of or record it in your notebook, because we will need to think about all these memory stores that we will continue to talk through the month of October by applying or identifying these 3 dimensions. Okay, so the first one is duration. That is, how long does this particular type of memory last? Its capacity, well, how many items of information, pieces of information can be held in this particular memory store? And then why it's even there. What is the function of that memory store? So as we continue to look through sensory memory, which is our next thing, to our short-term memory today and working memory on Tuesday, and then week 7 to long-term memory with multiple stores in it, we will have to answer all these questions for each of them, because that's how they are distinguished. Sorry, Leroy, I just noticed your chat. I can answer your question in a few minutes when we have a break, okay? All right, so let's start with the sensory memory, a very interesting and kind of difficult topic. So, it has to do with our sensory registers, so visual, auditory, taste, and so on. And what happens, just think about it in terms of, let's say, auditory memory, that it looks like it is limited in terms of how much of perceptual information we can hold on to. Now, for let's say, even if we consider 9 from Sherrington's classification of senses, only 2 of those received special names, and that's the visual and auditory sensory registers. Okay, so these special names are icon for the visual modality. It's like an icon on your computer, and echo for the auditory modality. So when you see the words icon and echo, that's almost always means that people are talking about the sensory memory for either visual or auditory information. Okay? And the term icon in particular comes from the work of George Sperling from 1968. So now think Miller in 1956, Atkinson and Schiff in 1968, Sperling 1968. So these years were very fertile for all kinds of developments in cognitive psychology. So why do we care so much about Sperling? Because he actually answered these 3 questions. What is the duration, capacity, and function of a sensory register? In his case, he studied icons, studied visual modality. So now here is the some of the information. So what's the duration? Well, then we'll come in a second to how he actually did that. The duration of icon, that is the perceptual visual information, is about 300 milliseconds or so. So it's very, very short. If you don't do anything, what's 300 milliseconds? It's a third of a second. It's crazy short, all right? If you don't do anything, it will disappear almost immediately. But in his opinion, quite a few items actually are being held in the sensory memory for vision. For auditory information, as you can see, the duration, of course, is much longer. Well, it has to do with language. We have to be able to listen to a chunk of speech and remember it. So it needs to be a little longer. And the function is to hold on to a certain amount of information that will be passed on through attention filter to the short-term memory. And of course, remember limited capacity of our channels. That's why it is necessary. It's like a launching pad into the short-term and long-term memory next. So enough to hold the information until it is processed, basically, as you remember from the early attention models for basic physical characteristics. And only in short-term memory, the information is processed for meaning and everything else, according to those theories. So capacity would be large, right? And duration will be very short for video, well, for visual information, a little longer for auditory information. So now let's look. We're not going to do it today because we don't have time. Actually, 11:10. It would be a good time to stop. All right, let's have a break until 11:17. Okay, so Leroy, let's get to your question. Clive Waring's issue is encoding or retrieval. It almost certainly that it is encoding, because as we know that especially long-term new memories are laid down in hippocampus. So if you cannot push the information into your long-term memory because your hippocampus is damaged, which is the case with Clive Wearing and case with HM, then there's no information that's making its way into your long-term memory. And that's why it's called anterograde amnesia. What's interesting especially in the case of HM, was that he actually remembered a lot of things before his surgery, which was when he was 27. So he remembered a lot from his childhood. He remembered that he had epileptic seizures and so on. With Clive, it's a little bit, I mean, he remembers some of the things from his past. He remembers that he has children, doesn't remember their names, doesn't learn anything new about his children getting married. So it cannot be a retrieval issue. If you never encoded anything, there's nothing for you to retrieve. So for retrograde amnesia, which is a little more rare, you lose a lot of your previous memories. That would be probably a retrieval issue. And you can, as long as you can, because in general, if you're amnesic, you have problems with many things. It's easier for them to encode new information, but it's almost impossible for them to retrieve. So that's the difference between anterograde and retrograde amnesia. Did I answer your question,
Yes,
Leroy?
thank you.
Good.
Professor,
Uh-huh.
I
We
actually
were talking to Justin.
can I is it okay if I could leave now? Because
Yes, Justin. We remember this is not an obligatory class. You can leave. Absolutely. See you next time.
that's the reason why. So because it was because of another class, so that's why.
I know. Just you
Thank
don't
you. Have
need
a good
to.
week.
You too. You don't need to apologize. Okay, let's continue. So this is what Sperling did, and I hope we might try to do a little bit of a demo of his experiment on Tuesday. He presented his participants with a visual display, the one that you see in front of you, that contained a 4x3 matrix of letters. And they were presented very, very briefly, as you can see. So 1/20th of a second, that's 50 milliseconds. That's extremely fast. I mean, normally you would perceive it as a flicker. You won't even supposedly see anything. With training, you can start getting better with this. And then after an interval, maybe a 1 second, a 0 second to 1 second in increments, people would be asked to recall all the letters they remember. So this was what is known as full report. That is, participants were required to report all 12 letters. Obviously, there were multiple trials, so it was a long perceptual experience, actually very difficult. And what he found, this is 1968, that people were not particularly good at that. So out of 12, remember, they only saw these letters for 50 milliseconds. They would report 4 to 5. Now, it's amazing that they could even do that much. So his first conclusion was, well, the capacity doesn't seem to be very large if it's only 4 to 5 items out of 12. But then he came up with a different manipulation. So instead of, well, he would give his participants the same array of 4x3 letters, but before he would present them, before he would ask them to report the letters, he would present them with one of the 3 tones. Anybody who's a musician would know. High tone, high pitch, medium tone, low pitch, and low tone, low pitch. And that was the cue to the participant to only recall that row. So if I go back to this, if you hear high tone, you're supposed to report Q, C, F, T. If you hear the low tone, you're supposed to report W, R, J, B. And this is what happened, which was lovely. Now, as opposed to full report, this is called partial report, because you're reporting only on 1 line out of 3. Out of a sudden, participants' recall was much better. It wasn't 12, but so this is a different version with 3. So under the condition of full report, 4 to 5, not even a half. But in the partial report, okay, they could actually report 9 to 10. Obviously, across the trials. You're not doing it in the same trial. You're not presenting the same trial 3 times. You're just averaging across all the trials. So he said, it's not that the participants were not capable of holding all this information in their sensory register. It's just it decays so fast that we don't have time to report it. And you could see that. So actually, he says, the capacity is much better than 4 to 5. It's 9 to 10. So it's large, quote unquote. But the problem is that you only have, I'm just showing you the details of that, but I want to show you the actual. Okay, so the idea is that participants actually saw all of them, well, most of them, but they only have this very narrow window when they can hold on to this icon until the icon disappears. So if you ask people to do it immediately after the presentation, that is at 0 second delay, then you get 9 to 10, almost perfect. But as you progress into 300 milliseconds after, or 500 milliseconds, up to a second, you lose information because the icon decays extremely rapidly. So, and where is my, we don't need all of that. Medium, low, let's see. Okay, here we go. These are the results. So people are able to remember and recall almost, well, 9 immediately after the presentation. 100 milliseconds later, they lose from, it goes from 9 to 7. At 300 milliseconds, a third of a second, it's only half, it's 6. And then you get to whole second, you're lucky if you get 5, and which is equivalent to a whole report. So that's where these numbers, this information, the dimensions for sensory register came from. They came from Sperling's partial report experiment. And again, like I said, I have an intention to try to get you guys to experience this, except that I'm not going to do 50 milliseconds because nobody will be able to even see any of that. But we'll try maybe 150 milliseconds and see if you can do that. Okay, so that's the sensory store. You can think of parallel experiments with ECO, that is the echoic auditory memory. That's behind the scenes. I don't have time for this. And now we can move on from the first component, the sensory memory, to the second component, right, which is our short-term memory. And you remember that's what's in between is attention. And attention is the one that helps us filter out unnecessary information and move the necessary information to the short-term memory, where we will actively engage with it before, if we need to, push it in the long-term memory. Okay. Oops, I was supposed to give you let's go back. All right, so the task, another little demo for you guys. That exposure, you will see a phone number, normal phone number with a zip code, not zip code, with a area code, but it's going to be very short. So let's see if you can get it, or maybe it's going to be another problem in terms of my presentation online that will be sort of delayed to you. So the idea is for you to try to see this phone number and memorize it, and then it's going to be very fast. So get ready. Okay, now I'm asking you to write down something else. If you still have your landline, probably not too many people. Okay, don't write it down in the chat. Right. Because otherwise it's going to be, all right. So if you don't have the landline, write down your cell phone number. That's difficult because most people don't even remember their cell phone number. And the third one is write the phone number you call the most. Could be your significant other, could be your parent, could be your whatever. Thank you, Bishoy, for doing it. Well, no, Parker spoiled the whole thing. The idea is that I'm giving you, hopefully I was supposed to give you some interference, which should have erased that number from your short-term memory. And now that would have been the question. And let's see if Bishoy did it right. 32815. Is it? Not quite, Bishoy, right?
Yeah, I only missed the last one.
Well, remember, if you were trying to call it, would have been a problem. Okay, good. So it worked even with Bishoy's with Parker's subversive actions. Okay. So this is the idea. When you are in the short-term memory, if you're holding on to 7 items, you've got to make room for new information. Therefore, you will be unable to recall all 7 pieces of information. Actually, there are some people some psychologists who think that it's not even 7. It's more like 4. Okay, we'll continue with our exploration of the model of memory. And the first thing that we will do is, again, use another overarching approach, which I would like you to remember, because that will give us sort of logic to think about memory for the next 2 classes, so 3 weeks. And this is called the stage analysis of memory. And the stage is that I already mentioned. Remember, we have to acquire the information, that is, we have to encode it. Then we have to store it, either short-term, temporary, like sensory registers, or short-term memory, or hopefully permanently. That's our long-term memory. And then finally, we have to use it, which is known as retrieval. So that's the stage analysis of memory: encoding, storage, and retrieval. And I'll keep reminding you about that and even asking you, because it's one of those multiplication tables for cognitive psychology: encoding, storage, retrieval, or acquisition, storage, usage. Okay. So what's the encoding, right? Well, we have to lay down a memory trace or engram to begin with. Okay, so from sensory memory to short-term memory, and then pushing it into long-term memory. And obviously, like I already mentioned, there is a very tight connection between perception and memory, because percepts leave memory traces. That's how we expand our knowledge. That's how we expand both of semantic and autobiographical memory, declarative in this case. During storage, again, the trace has to be somewhere. And that's an interesting question. What are the physiological and biological reflexes of memory traces? Take 232 to answer that question. And of course, we need to hold on to the information that's useful to us indefinitely, because we never know when we might need it. And finally, we have our retrieval, and that's how we get access to knowledge. And we need it because it helps us with our behavior. We need to know what to do. So this is an overarching theme for short-term memory, working memory, and long-term memory that we will continue to talk about in the next 3 weeks. So this 3-stage approach is very useful. That's what I'm trying to say, basically. Especially when you read chapter 6, it's probably less noticeable in chapter 5, the one that you are studying this week and next week. But for chapter 6, it's extremely important. All the effects that we will be studying will be attached either to encoding or to retrieval, or a combination of both. And storage is about forgetting. That's a little different, but still. So keep that 3-stage approach up and close for the next 3 classes. Now, so how do we study that? That's an interesting question. Well, we can either study it in the field, asking people questions about their memories, or we can study it in the lab. Now, since we are cognitive psychologists, at least cognitive psychologists in training for you guys, is we will talk about the lab approaches. And that's one of the reasons why you are asked to be engaged in data collection for 3 experiments, because that's how cognitive psychology is done. It's done through experimentation. And again, coming back to the beginning of the class, understanding variables, levels, and the connection between them is critical to do well in cognitive psychology. And it has to be exciting. I mean, it is exciting for me. Hopefully I can make it exciting for you, at least a little bit. We do have quite a few people in our department who are experimental psychologists. In particular, we have Dan McCloskey, who does neuroscientific research, but also experimental research on schizophrenia and stuff like that, using animal models. And we have Leora Yetnikov, who is our relatively new colleague who does, and then we have this kind of stuff. And we have people who do experimental developmental research, including me. Okay, so what we can do, the problem with doing it in the field is we have no control. So if I ask you a question, what did you have for dinner last night? I'm going to get whatever, 16 different answers because everybody had her own dinner. If I ask you about your most vivid memory before the age of, let's say, to be on the safe side, let's say before the age of 3, some of you may even say, I don't have any memories before the age of 3. That's possible. So it's almost impossible to create a controlled environment in the field. That's why we have to go to the lab. We can ask people the same questions and have them remember things. And the easiest way to do that, right, is to have control over everything that we do. That is, we create our materials. We create our design of the experiment. We create our questions. Okay? And that's a particular laboratory model that I'm going to talk to you about called the verbal learning paradigm. It's called verbal because it's going to be about words. And it's learning, well, because you have to memorize these words. And it's paradigm because paradigm, oops, where am I? I want to type it in the chat. It's an interesting concept that everybody should be familiar with. And paradigm is a way of organizing things. It's a design task. So it's design materials and procedure if you think about our lab report. Okay. So what is this verbal learning paradigm? Like I already mentioned, the 3 things. So we have 3 phases in every experiment that is using verbal learning paradigm. We have the learning phase. You have to memorize something. Then we have some kind of retention interval. Sometimes it's very short, a few seconds. Sometimes it's long, a few days. Sometimes it's very long if it's a longitudinal study. And then we have a testing phase when we ask people to recall whatever they had to hold on during the retention interval, right? So learning phase, list of words, usually. And these are the words that are familiar to participants. Very rarely we use novel materials that really don't mean anything. It's almost always the test of, one would say, episodic memory than semantic memory. Okay, retention, 30 seconds. That's what we need minimum for STM. After that, it's going to be all LTM. So the duration of short-term memory is 30 seconds. The capacity is, well, if Miller is right, 7 plus minus 2. And the function is to rehearse the material until we can encode it in the long-term memory. And finally, you can be tested on one of the 3 tasks: free recall, cued recall, or recognition. This is what we did in the beginning when we looked at the 7 dwarfs. We tried to do both. Actually, all 3 of them. First, it was free recall, name them. Then I tried to give you a couple of hints, maybe somebody whose name starts with the B and a longish word. And finally, I gave you all of them embedded with distractors, calling it the recognition. So that's a critical difference between the three tasks, and they are in the testing phase. So when somebody says verbal learning paradigm, that's what we mean. Again, free recall. Let's do another example in the chat, but it's not going to be a problem. To everybody in the chat, without Googling, without cheating, I'm not grading you, please type in the name of the capital of South Dakota. You all took geography, right? I assume. If you don't know, just say, I don't know. I have no idea. Okay, no idea. Okay. Okay, it doesn't exist as it does. No idea. Oh, Bishoy knows again. Fantastic, but he did it privately. Good job, Bishoy. Thank you. Okay, so nobody knows it. There, Bishoy just did it again. So the idea would be then for me to say, okay, it's a word that starts with a P, and it's a French male name. So this would be cued recall. I'm giving you two cues, right? I'm telling you that it starts with a P, and it's a male name in French, right? And ultimately, I would have given you maybe a bunch of, I don't know, Francois, Paul, René, and then Pierre. And you would say, ah, P and French, Pierre. And Bishoy is absolutely. How do you happen to know? This is the first time that ever happened to me, Bishoy. How do you happen to know the capital of South Dakota?
I'm good at geography, Professor.
I see. Okay, so you cheated a little bit.
No, I'm good at geography.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm good at I take geography right now. Actually, it's one of my courses.
Ah, okay, good.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, I could make it, you know, let's see, maybe. So Bishoy, you're not eligible, so stay put. Let me ask other people. Let's use Europe as a, there's a country, and Karen might know that. There's a country called Albania in Europe. What's the capital of Albania? Well, of course, Karen has to know. She's Albanian. Okay. Again, have no idea. All right. But you see the point, right? Free recall is really difficult because you have nothing to hold on to when you're thinking about the answer. Cued recall is useful, but only if you already have something, some memory trace from some previous experience. Otherwise, it's not going to be helpful either. And recognition is the easiest, but again, only when you have something to hold on to. Okay, let's do one little exercise again before finishing with the STM. Get ready. I'm gonna read you a bunch of words. Let's see how many. 18. Don't cheat. Don't write them down. Okay. Are you guys ready? Okay. Ember, red, cold, foot, girl, king, mountain, needle, rough, slow, spider, thief, potato, happy, folder, narrow, boring, bulb. Don't write anything. Instead, I want you to count from 763 by 7. So 763 minus 7 is going to be 756. 756 minus 7 is going to be 749. And so do that for a few more seconds. Actually, it will be helpful if you were to do it out loud, if you can, of course, if you are in the situation when you can talk. Keep counting. It's called the serial subtraction task. So 749, 742, 735, and so on. A few more seconds. Okay, let's stop counting. Now in the chat, type in the words you remember from this list. Remember there were 18 of them. And do it privately, I guess. Jeffrey 6. 5. Parker 4. Okay. Oh, Karen, very good. I think that's all I remember. All right. Now, of course, I was reading these words pretty fast. I see Melissa, 6. Go on. Potato. Okay, very good. All right, so on average, you guys, I'm looking at the answers. You did 4 to 5 to 5 to 6, I would say. Okay, Bishoy did 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, Bishoy, you have one that is not on the list, but that's okay. Nick, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So nobody remembers the last word on the list? Come on, guys. That should be easy. What was the last word? Now can do it to everybody. Stop. No. Oh, it does not count. Stop doesn't count. No. Folder. No. Okay. A Q. Queued recall. It started with a B. And it had 4 letters or 4 sounds. And Rebecca says only 2. Oh. Okay. So what was the last one? Oh, come on. B. 2, 3, 4. Boring, good, Isaac, but was the one before that? No, not bark, not book. It was bulb. Okay, so as you can see how pathetic we are. Out of 18 words, although a relatively fast presentation, but it was intentional. Plus, so your learning phase was listening to me saying these 18 words to you at the speed of about 1.5 seconds per word. Your retention interval was actually filled, hopefully, with the interference task by serial counting, subtraction. And now you were in the testing phase where I asked you to recall as many words and the order didn't matter. And as you can see, so that's the verbal learning paradigm. And it's important because all the, most, not to say all, so here they are. Most of the studies, classical studies of 7 principles of memory that we'll talk about a week from the 6th is about verbal learning paradigm. Okay, so here they are. Now recognition, right? But there are no distractors, so everything is as it was. Okay, so we are now talking about the encoding stage in the remaining 15 minutes of the class for today. So here's the main question. Remember the loop at the short-term memory. Is it all about rehearsal? That is, if you rehearse these words forever and ever, or whatever, 10 minutes, will you be able to memorize them and hold on to them during whatever retention interval it will be? That is, the main question is a memory a function of rehearsal? And that's a very important empirical question, because if that's all there is, all we have to tell everybody, children who learn at school, you guys, college students, people who prepare for professions, medical school, law school, anything else, just rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. So the bad news is it doesn't work. The good news is that if you do something to that rehearsal, to that encoding, because we'll switch to talk about encoding, there are things you can do to improve your memory dramatically. Going back to another favorite figure in the history of cognitive psychology, it's Hermann Ebbinghaus, who was a German psychologist. Well, he didn't really, in those days, this is 1885, there was already the first lab in Leipzig. So Ebbinghaus was actually a relatively wealthy man. So he decided to write his dissertation on memory, and he basically directed himself. He didn't have an advisor. But when you do memory research, you need somebody who needs to kind of check you, right? Are you recalling things right? So he actually used his servant, his valet, as a person who helped him to get through his dissertation. So this is where he started with. He started with this law of repetition, or what I call the zero law of memory. The more we rehearse something, the better we'll remember it. Makes sense, right? Especially for short-term memory. So this is what he did. He wrote, basically created many, many lists of syllables. Now, this stuff, ZAT, is a syllable. It has a consonant, C, a vowel, A, and another consonant at the end. And they completely, well, of course, you can have a German word that is like this, but obviously he only used the nonsense syllables, the syllables that don't mean anything. So he created many, many of these lists because he wanted to do his research with the lists. And then he used the verbal learning paradigm. He would tell himself that he needed to memorize a particular list. And it was important for him that all the words in the list were memorized in the order they occurred. So he used what's known as association by contiguity. And then he would measure how long it would take him to memorize the word list to perfection by asking his servant to check on his memory. And then there was some retention interval, 20 minutes, 1 hour, 1 day, and so on. And he would try to recall the list. Now, I can imagine if you have a bunch of these lists and all they have are these nonsense syllables, it's really tedious, really difficult. But he persevered. He did that for 2 years because you get a lot of interference, right? So this is what he found. When he tried to recall a list, let's say 20 minutes later, okay, he would not remember it perfectly. He would still miss a few words. Then he would tell himself, well, he would give himself a task to relearn this list. And he would measure how long it will take him to relearn it again. So if the first time it took him 16 whatever seconds, when he had to relearn it, it would be only 12 seconds. Okay? So he was much faster. And he called it relearning. But as you can see, as your retention interval increases, right, to hours. So 8 hours later, your relearning savings, he called it savings, went down. 64 hours later, what would be that in terms of almost 3 days, right? He and from this he came up with this idea that this can be represented as a forgetting curve. And that's what we really want to know about, when, especially when we talk about storage, the retention stage. What he showed from his lists, that about 40% of the stuff is lost, of the information lost 1 hour after the encoding. So here you are now sitting in this class, and then you may go on with your life to go to another class or do something else. You will lose 40% of the information within an hour. And see how it goes. All right. When you get to 3 days, 4 to 5 days, all you would be remember is slightly over 20% of the information, but it kind of stays with you. Of course, it has to be something meaningful. If it's about nonsense syllables, that's not going to work. But the idea is that cognitive psychology is very useful as an applied field, because it tells us that if there is something really critical in the new information that you have just learned, you need to do something within the first hour of acquiring this information to prevent this 40% loss. And in terms of regular learning that has to do with college classes or maybe your professional development, you really have to sorry, looking at something. You really have to do it within the first hour of when this information became first available to you. So you have to go through the material, ask questions, not read and highlight, because that doesn't engage any encoding processes at all. That's why highlighting is the worst strategy to study at all. Now, of course, if you're doing a quick prep cramming for your midterm, you don't care, because as soon as this midterm is over, this information is gone, and who cares? But if it is something that you need for your professional development or for your future career, whatever, rehearsing, encoding and elaborating on the stuff within the first hour, and then spreading the study throughout the next period of time, which in this case could be 30 days, a whole month, is a much better strategy to hold on to the information. So this zero law of memory, okay, seems to be working if we think about many sort of practical applications in our life. But, of course there is but. Just rehearsing, just repeating stuff all over and over again is not the key to effective storage. That is, remember, you have to transfer from short-term memory into long-term memory, okay? So you encode into long-term memory, and then you hold on to it, like I said, potentially infinitely. So here is a very quick experiment that is very neat in 1973, based on this idea that just plain rehearsal, that is repeating over and over and over again, does not work. This is what they did. They gave the participants a list of words, verbal learning paradigm, and they said, your task is to remember the word that starts with the letter P. And as soon as you get one, forget the previous one. So if you get P's here, right, this is the first word that starts with P, then you have chair, you will be able to rehearse P's twice, well, whatever amount of time, and then you will recall P's. Now, if you get potato, potato is separated from pond by 2 words, so you're getting, potato gets twice as much rehearsal as peas, right? So you should be recalling it better. Okay, and then look at position. That's the last word on my list. We have music, radio, table, cat. So position gets 4 times as much rehearsal as P's. So here is the prediction. This is how experimental psychology works. The prediction is, the hypothesis is that the more you rehearse in terms of length of time, the better you'll recall. So the prediction is that out of these words, position should be recalled better than pond, pond should be recalled better than potato, and potato should be recalled better than peas, because each of them has a shorter duration of repetition. And what did they find? Peas were remembered 17% of the time, and position was remembered 18% of the time. So that repetition, technically, they repeated the P word, didn't do much. The recall was exactly the same, regardless of how much of time they got for rehearsal. So it's not the key. So what we need is a different type of repetition, not the rote maintenance rehearsal. Useful in old days when we didn't have our cell phones and we had to run to the phone to dial, I don't know, a pizza parlor to order pizza. We need something that will be elaborative rehearsal. Something, and I'll talk about this more next week and the week after, something that we will allow us to take the new information, right? Peas, pond, potatoes, position, and attach it to something we already know, something that's already in our memory, something that is critical for what we do in life. Maybe you are a runner, so you know a bunch of numbers in terms of different records. Maybe you are, I don't know, an NFL fan. You remember all the statistics about different quarterbacks and whatever. You can use that information to attach the new stuff to the old one, and that will become easier for you to retrieve this new stuff. And that's where we will stop, because we don't really have time to start the new section. So we'll come back to that short-term and working memory on Tuesday. Again, just to remind you that Tuesday, the 6th, is not a mandatory class. We will continue with this and we'll do a bunch of exercises. Okay? The class is over, guys. I'll see you soon. Take care.
Have a great weekend.
You too, Denise.
All right. Bye.
Bye, Rebecca.
Have a good day, Professor.
You too.